Frequently, life seems to be one challenge after another, or perhaps it's more like a roller coaster, challenge followed by something good, followed by something unexpected, and so on. And we search for ways to understand and ways to handle it, and more important, ways to respond. What am I supposed to do with all the stuff that happens? We study philosophy in order to understand how should I be? How should I understand the world so that I can be in a certain way? And we do spend a good deal of time on this show talking about exactly those kinds of things. We've looked at various philosophies, most notably Stoicism, to understand a way of being that helps us handle the world better. We've also recently taken a look at a little bit of what Buddhism says. And today we're also going to venture into another cultural angle, and that is the Chinese philosophy specifically of Wu Wei, which is the philosophy essentially of doing nothing, which sounds on the one hand great. Doing nothing sounds attractive a lot of the time. And on the other hand, it sounds like, is that a philosophy? Is that an approach to life? I mean, it sounds like an invitation to apathy, to laziness, to doing nothing. And yet we find that in Taoism, Wu Wei is one of the most important and basic ways of being that is taught. How do we understand what it means when the Daoists say the way to follow Dao, the way, is through Wu Wei, which is central to the understanding of doing nothing and yet leaving nothing undone. So what does that beautiful paradox mean? How can we learn how to be like that and perhaps in some way make our ability to handle the ever-changing roller coaster world a little easier? So of course, as we see, because of that so-called paradox, Wu Wei is not about doing nothing. It really better is understood as effortless action, sometimes translated as actionless action, which is another one of those paradoxes. But effortless action, which is kind of like being at peace no matter what task you're engaged in. You can be engaged in the most frenetic and insane kind of activity, but the ability to be at peace while engaging in that activity and carrying out that activity with the maximum skill and the maximum efficiency. The translation of Wu Wei, which is not doing or not trying, but it isn't actually about inaction. It is about that state of mind that allows us to maintain calm and peacefulness while doing whatever is required. It's the dynamic, kind of effortless, unself-conscious state of mind of a person who is optimally active and effective and doing what they need to be doing while feeling as if they aren't really doing anything in particular, whether they're creating something amazing or negotiating the politics that are spoken about, or negotiating, dealing with other people, social situations, even if it was something huge, like dealing with a global crisis in some kind of a way. There is this conduct, this approach, an effective conduct, which is this harmonious, calm way of Wu Wei, effortless action. There's a kind of totality in Wu Wei. It involves the mind, it involves the emotions, it involves the body. So it's there's a wholeness in it, means it's not only a state of mind or an approach, it's a state of being, and the entire self becomes that state of Wu Wei. Being in the state of Wu Wei is described as relaxing and enjoyable and yet rewarding, in a way more rewarding than simple pleasure or simple relaxation. And it has often been compared to the concept of flow, which has been described by the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And that idea of flow is this idea of being in the zone in some way. Csikszentmihalyi says that flow is the opposite of kind of psychic entropy. Those who obtain it become stronger and develop a stronger, more confident self. He says because more of their psychic energy has been invested successfully in goals they themselves have chosen to pursue. So there's this harmony between what they're doing, what they want to do, why they're doing it, and that is partially what is described as flow. The attainment of that state of flow is something that Csikszentmihalyi has spent a good deal of time describing and explaining, and we'll touch on that again a little bit later. And similarly, the question of how to achieve Wu Wei is just as extensively discussed and theorized by others describing this as the ideal state. It's said that we are to be like the bamboo that bends in the wind, or the plant that adjusts itself to the shape of a tree, letting go of ideals that we may develop, pursue too passionately, or to force them onto things. You know, when there's a disharmony between what we want and what's going on and what's possible or how the world is now, as much as passion and enthusiasm and etc. are all great to achieve that, in Wu Wei, that would be seen as forcing ourselves onto things, not going with what's really happening. Wu Wei instead invites us to respond to the demand of the situation and the circumstances rather than forcing ourselves on it. And only when we put our own ego-driven plans aside can we see what is demanded and respond to what is demanded of the world that we find ourselves in. And as a result of that, we lose our sense of self-consciousness and we achieve a sense of unity with the environment. And this unity between self and environment releases an energy which is normally lost or held back by willful thinking, by our egos, by our passions. And when I say willful, ego, passion, I don't mean in themselves. Those are negative things, and they're things that we do experience and pursue all the time. But this Daoist philosophy suggests to us when we let go of those things and actually become at one with their environment, then we achieve a new state of consciousness. And sometimes that's like that old story of the river that encounters a mountain, and it doesn't bash away at the mountain. It simply goes with the shape of the mountain and flows around the mountain, following the shape of the mountain. So it's adjusted to the environment that it's found itself in. And through this gentle persistence and total compliance with the actual shape of the problem, it works around the obstacle and eventually overcomes the obstacle. Give it a few million years, there will be no mountain there and only a river as it erodes the mountain. But it did that not by bashing at the mountain, but by complying with the shape of the environment that the mountain had created. It's not quite the same as the ideas of developing flow that Csikszentmihalyi suggests. He says, you know, a person can make himself happy or miserable regardless of what's actually happening outside, just by changing the contents of consciousness. He says, we all know individuals who can transform hopeless situations into challenges to be overcome just through the first force of their personalities. the ability to persevere, says Csikszentmihalyi, despite obstacles and setbacks, is the quality people most admire in others, and justly so. It is probably the most important trait, not only for succeeding in life, but enjoying it as well. So crucially, he goes on to say, to develop this trait, one must find ways to order consciousness so as to be in control of feelings and thoughts. And you can hear there's a different angle, this idea of order and control of feeling and thoughts. Despite this being about flow, according to him, doesn't seem to flow as smoothly or as harmoniously as the environment as what Wu Wei has been describing. Wu Wei, which is because it's about non-action, because it's about responding to the environment rather than imposing on the environment, is different from flow. Not doing, not trying, doesn't mean we don't do anything and check out. It means that we do the right thing without even trying to do the right thing, because it naturally arises. Because we're in the state of harmony with everything going on around us, the exactly right thing arises without us having to intellectually figure out what it is or impose our own goals. We remember we've let go of our ego in this Daoist approach and can really respond automatically with the right thing. And in so doing, we generate a kind of harmony ourselves. It's said that people who are in Wu Wei have De, and De is usually translated as power or charisma or virtue or something like a radiance that other people can actually detect. So it's, while it's a kind of a neutral, seemingly passive state, which would appear to be as kind of non-action as possible, non-active as possible, passive as possible, it actually ends up by beginning to affect other people around the person who is in the state of Wu Wei, as he gives off that virtue or power, something like that. So basically, when we are naturally expressing the kind of the best version of ourselves, the purest, the most aligned, the most attuned, people actually respond to that. And it's almost as if, you know, as human beings, we are naturally predisposed, pre-programmed to respond positively to other people radiating that goodness. We can feel the goodness in others. It doesn't mean that we sometimes aren't fooled by people who radiate other things, but we can feel the goodness in others, and we're drawn to those people. I mean, research has been conducted on what are the key attributes that we look for in people, leaders, that we're naturally drawn to and that we naturally follow. And those characteristics are honesty, forward-looking, competence, and inspirational. Those are the things we look for in people that we're drawn to and people that lead us. And those are features that we kind of radiate through that power that people sense, that inspirational honesty. But the interesting thing about inspirational is that it doesn't mean someone is standing up and giving an amazing speech. Those things can be inspirational, but that's not the point. It's simply through their action, not action, and that energy of calmness and appropriateness and harmony and success with their relationship with the environment that we sense that inspirational nature that they have. Unsurprisingly, the Chinese have explored every conceivable method or strategy to move people into a state of Wu Wei, especially almost like as a therapeutic tool, not exactly in therapy, but effectively as a therapeutic tool to move from the alienating, difficult state of the world. I mean, not only is the world challenging in the roller coaster sense that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, but also in the sense of alienation, that we feel so at odds with our environment sometimes, because of all, whether it be the craziness, the unpredictability, or just the difficulties that we face in living. So that creates the feeling of being at odds. And of course, Wu Wei is an ideal solution to that, because it doesn't address the issues themselves. It says, here's how to not be at odds with the world around you. Well, the here's how is the problem. So Wu Wei says, this is the state of not being at odds with the world around you. But the issue is, how do we achieve it? And different ways have been described. The carve and polish method of subjecting yourself to training, to instilling the right disposition. And that was really the idea of Confucius. Confucian philosophy was to almost develop ritual methods. So that's actually what he said you must do. And through regular repetition and behaving in a certain way and not behaving in a certain way, you can develop this state of Wu Wei, which is not what everyone agreed with. So if you take the philosopher Lao Tzu, Lao Tzu said the opposite. He says Confucius has got it wrong. What we need to do is let go of everything. Let go of the goals, the aspirations, the beliefs, the everything. Reject goals and let those goals be obtained by themselves, by the environment naturally bringing them to us. And that's requiring the harmony between us and the environment will achieve those goals. Other philosophers have suggested cultivating your sprouts. Look for the beginning versions, the incipient tendencies of these characteristics, such as the honesty, the inspirationalness, the characteristics of Wu Wei themselves, and then nurture them and expand them and grow them and so on. And then they're just those who say, just let go of everything completely and forget about trying, forget about not trying. Just let the values you want to embrace pick you up and carry you along. Clearly, there is no clear guidance, no agreement. And part of that is because of this paradox of how do we try to not try. There is an insight that comes from the Csikszentmihalyi philosophy of flow. And Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi says, the knowledge of how to control consciousness must be reformulated every time the cultural context changes. The wisdom of the mystics, of the Sufi, of the great yogis, or of the Zen masters might have been excellent in their own time and might still be the best, he says, if we lived in those times and in those cultures. But when transplanted to contemporary California, those systems lose quite a bit of their original power. California can be anywhere. They contain elements that are specific to their original contexts. And when these accidental components are not distinguished from what is essential, the path to freedom gets overgrown by brambles of meaningless mumbo jumbo. Ritual form wins over substance, and the seeker is back where he started. A very deep insight that says, by thoughtlessly repeating whatever people did hundreds of years ago or in some other culture, ritualistically, all that you do is you create more meaninglessness and get yourself back to square one. It's a very profound insight that applies to a lot of philosophical pursuits and similar things that we attempt in our world. So how do we try to not try? The paradox is real. And the paradox arises from the fact that kind of it feels like life is not like that. Life is still full of the same challenges. So, of course, Csikszentmihalyi says the knowledge of how to control consciousness must be reformulated every time that cultural context changes. To Csikszentmihalyi, the solution to that is order in consciousness, investing your psychic energy in realistic goals, matching your skills to your opportunities, and bringing awareness and concentration to the task at hand so that everything else is forgotten. You can already hear that that isn't Wu Wei, that it's distinctly different. It becomes very goal-oriented and skills-oriented. And he says, by stretching skills, by reaching towards higher challenges, a person becomes an increasingly extraordinary individual. Well, Chinese philosophy doesn't agree with that. In the discussion of Wu Wei, we see the philosopher Zhuangzi say that, well, if you look at the great sages who developed this philosophy and who practice this philosophy, they are not attached to strict values. They live their lives, they have their goals, but they maintain an openness that allows them to change direction when circumstances demand, or let go of something that has turned from a gift to a burden and move on to something else. And so they've learned, they've naturally adapted to the flow of how things are going with minimal interference from the conscious mind, although it's still a challenge on how do we pull that off. And part of the answer to how we pull that off is also that these sages, he says, were not bound by these strict values that says this is the way that is right. This is the way to be, which is in fact what Csikszentmihalyi is saying, because he's saying that the way to be an extraordinary individual is to be focused on your goals, to do the goals this way, to, all these, this is the way to be that individual, which isn't quite the same as saying this is the way to go with the flow. So it's rather, says Zhuangzi, that you need a flexibility that allows you to adapt spontaneously to what the situation demands. And he compares it with a mirror. He says, this is Zhuangzi, a mirror simply reflects whatever is presented in front of it. It's not muddled by past images that once appeared on the mirror. It's always freshly responding to life. You could say a mirror is spontaneous. And this is a characteristic of Wu Wei. Like a mirror, spontaneously responding to whatever life presents, optimally expressing the best we're capable without even trying to do that. The sages had goals, but they also maintained an openness that allowed them to change direction when the situation demanded it, or let go of something that has turned from a gift to a burden. And again, remember the image of the mirror that says the mirror is not muddled by images of what have appeared in it before. Every image is fresh. Every image is a response to life as it is right now. While Csikszentmihalyi says, if you know your desires and work with purpose to achieve them, and your actions are congruent with your feelings, you achieve inner harmony. But a physical skill or a goal achievement is a great analogy, but it doesn't make for a good person. So, and that's the issue with what Csikszentmihalyi says about flow, is that here's how to achieve flow and become an extraordinary person. Other people can notice you. But does that mean you've got those characteristics of leadership that we mentioned? Honesty, inspiration. Wu Wei represents a state of being in a perfected state as part of a greater whole, that responsiveness to the environment is not only about so you can achieve your goal, but it actually makes you part of the greater whole. So while the individual is doing something and embracing the environment, it becomes embraced by others. Remember, it affects others. It isn't just they look at you and think, wow, you're great, but actually there's a power, a radiance that actually affects us. And so what is important is that Wu Wei is grounded in a connection to something bigger than the individual. It's got spiritual dimensions and social dimensions that are not like flow, which ultimately becomes goal-oriented in some kind of a way. Wu Wei, in the state of attunement to the environment, responsiveness to the environment, flowing in harmony with the environment, allows a much bigger result. Wu Wei, Taoism, is a philosophy that's not just about self, it's about everyone. It allows everyone to live in harmony. It's not about I perform a generous action. It's about I become a generous person. It's about becoming an amazing human being, connected to something bigger than yourself, and who makes a beautiful contribution to the world.